So first off, thanks very much to CCDAS for inviting me to moderate this fireside chat. A really important topic. I think we've already started touching on it in the previous discussion, some which I missed, but I can imagine the types of comments that were being made. And I'm particularly interested in this whole issue of how the institutional digital assets market evolves and how traditional finance and digital assets can converge. So I'm delighted to be here today with Stephan Dreyer, who's the Managing Director of ANA, the Association of National Numbering Agencies, and also Denis, who's Product Owner at the Digital Token Identifier Foundation. We've only got about 20 minutes, but this is really just for us, I think, to introduce a little bit about what these two organizations are doing, how they're partnering together, and also why I think the issue of standards and numbering and unique identifiers is kind of rising up the agenda. So, Stephan, maybe I could just ask you to give a quick introduction to yourself and the work that you're doing.
Sure. Good morning. Pleasure to be here. I'm Stephan Dreyer. I work for the Association of National Numbering Agencies, also known as ANA. We are a global member association, trade association, with 120 members globally, which represent financial market infrastructures such as exchanges, CSDs, data vendors, central banks, and regulators. And the one thing that they all have in common is that they are national numbering agencies designated by their local supervisory authority to perform the function of assignment of standard identifiers for financial and referential instruments. So we're an association very much involved in the promotion and adoption of standards in the capital market space, coming obviously traditionally from a traditional finance background, but as we see the application of DLT and blockchain technology more and more in the financial services space, one of the topics that we picked up is looking at the evolution of the standards that we're responsible for, such as the International Securities Identification Number, and ensuring that it is fit for purpose in the digital asset space.
And Denis, if you could also introduce yourself, please.
Sure. Hi, my name is Denis Dounaev, and I'm the DTI product owner at the DTIF, which is the foundation has been set up as a registration authority for the DTI standard. So it's a new ISO standard that's specifically been created to add identifiers to digital assets. My background, I think similar to Stephan's as well, is very much in the traditional finance space, kind of data analytics, MiFID II, AML, those sort of things. So I'm coming into crypto world to help sort of move these standards that we have in the financial market to set them up in the crypto world, essentially.
And it'd be interesting just to hear a little bit about how you're working together, because obviously the national numbering agencies traditionally haven't dealt with digital assets because that asset class didn't exist. And it's an interesting development because it's an asset class that sort of grew up from retail rather than being sort of developed on the institutional side. So, over the last 10 years, 15 years, from the birth of Bitcoin, we've seen, so many different tokens evolve. Someone just mentioned 18,000, I think, different tokens and cryptocurrencies. So how is that kind of impacting on your world, and how can we navigate that vast number of assets that are out there in the market?
Yeah, so one of the first challenges that we had when I joined ANA 3.5 years ago was looking at what is a digital asset, just trying to understand it. What is crypto? What are all these different terms? What does it mean? What is the implication for something like the ISIN identifier and other standard identifiers that we're responsible for? So ANA is heavily involved in the International Organization for Standards, so ISO activities, the groups that look to develop and maintain the standards. We set up a task force. And we came to the conclusion, basically, that for that part of the world, those traditional financial instruments which are being issued on DLT, there was really no change. It was a technology-agnostic approach. A bond is still a bond, a stock is still a stock. And so there, the ISIN continues to remain fit for purpose. But then you had all these other new things, the Bitcoins, the stable coins, other cryptocurrencies. And we really needed to look at what the implication was, how what are the needs there in the market for things like data management, risk management, compliance. And we came to the conclusion that the same needs are required, but maybe a little bit more. And we were aware of the developments with the digital token identifier, and we linked up with the DTIF to look at how we can collaborate and make the two standards, the ISIN and the DTI, complementary. If you want to add anything.
So what was the question?
Just a little bit about how you're working together and sort of how your work intersects with Anna.
Yes. So the way I see it, the two standards are doing slightly different things, but they kind of well, quite different things actually, but they nicely complement each other. So with the ISIN, it's a traditional, identifier. It's been established for many years, 40 years or something, and it's very good at identifying the unique attributes for the asset. DTI standard is quite different. What it focuses on is identifying the token uniquely. So for us, it in a way it doesn't matter who the creator is, who maintains the token, who updates it. We look at the technical implementation details of the token, and if it exists, it gets issued DTI. And then what's good is when we're working with Anna is that if we merge it together with the ISIN and link one to another, we have both. We have the identification of the token or tokens, which then linked to identification of the asset.
And why is this issue now around standardization and identifiers sort of rising up the agenda as it comes to digital assets? Is it because the digital asset market is getting more complex? Is it because institutional digital assets, and the traditional market and the digital market are now kind of coming closer together? Is that the reason why this is rising to the fore in terms of what your organizations are focused on?
Yeah, I think very much, unlike in the past where the kind of standards became the catch-up kind of topic, catching up to technology and regulation, we're making a conscious effort to kind of keep pace with those two other dialogues. Obviously, technology is the driver and the first mover in the stuff. Then you have the regulatory debates, looking at how do we keep everything in a level playing field, set the stage for how participants are meant to interact, and the standards then become the tools for the market to implement that. And so we very much want to make sure that there is an awareness and understanding, particularly as you have a lot more new players coming into the space, offering very specific type of services versus incumbents in that space who are maybe have waited, have taken a very conservative approach and taken a bit longer to kind of look at developing their infrastructures to accommodate for digital assets. So it was very important for us in that respect so that we can develop the right tools and shape the way that we're developing the standards in accordance with the market needs.
And I mean, for you, Denis, what's missing in the digital asset side of the market? Because, we have some of these ISO standards and identifiers in, for example, OTC derivatives or sort of traditional financial markets. But what is it that's missing? What's the problem that we need to fix?
I think it's a very kind of new market. Obviously, it's very dynamic. So there's developments happening all the time, which is very interesting to see it grow. But what it means is that the implementation standards are not the same across multiple blockchains or DLTs. So if you want to look at if you don't do some analytics across multiple blockchains or analytics across traditional and tokenized assets, there is no link that exists as part of the implementation. So which is where DTI comes in as a standard that can be then linked across multiple implementations, and then that analytics can be run, which then allow things like risk management or regulatory monitoring for AML or MAR, that sort of thing.
And how does the lack of standards impact? I mean, I guess there's obviously two elements. There's the issuers of the tokens, and there's also the investors. So, what is the lack of standards? What problems is that creating for those different players in the market?
So Maybe I'm not sure that there's a lack of standards, but maybe there's a lack of awareness of some of the standards and utilization of them. Obviously, there's always more that can be done, and one of the things that we certainly identified is that standards have to evolve with the market as well. But I think where the focus is, and we have different sets of standards, so the ones that we're referring to, such as the DTI and the ISIN, are very much focused on the identification, the unique identification of a particular asset and the associated tokens. But then there's further work that needs to be done that is kind of in our book of work for the future in terms of classifying what these assets are. Are they securities? Are they commodities? Are they something else? Very much in line with a lot of the regulatory debates. But I think as a starting point, if we're talking about token X, having an identifier that validates for us that we're talking about the same thing. So if we do our data aggregation, if we're looking at the life cycle of that asset through a trading cycle or through its life cycle itself, we know that we're talking about the same thing. So we can measure our exposure, we can measure other risk, compliance, and the whole cost of data management becomes a lot more efficient and less expensive.
Yeah, and I know that reporting is a particularly complex area in digital assets and something that certain firms are starting to specialize in from a sort of fund administration perspective of, how we actually, as you say, manage the data and the correct reporting and compliance. So this is another big part of it as well, isn't it? That we need to be all talking about the same thing because, different jurisdictions are I think even in the UK, we've got different definitions of what is a crypto asset from different bodies. So first of all, we have to define that, and then we have to try and to be able to measure and track what's actually happening in terms of trades and transactions. So it's not necessarily that straightforward presumably for you guys to actually identify, okay, well, what is it that we're talking about if it's not clear from the regulatory framework what's defined as a crypto asset?
Yes, absolutely. And the standards, they help facilitate that whole regulatory reporting. So regulators will typically then define some mechanism and obviously the whole reporting regime that is required for trading. And so, for example, you have with the MiCA regulation and the introduction of the DLT pilot regime in the EU for financial instruments. Obviously, ISIN is there, and we have recommendations from the national competent authorities and ESMA to utilize the DTI. Similar types of things in the UK with the sandbox here. So I think the standards and the identifiers become the tools that allow organizations to fulfill their requirements.
Yeah, and I think we're going to be hearing from the FCA a bit more about the digital asset sandbox. I think it's on the other stage a bit later on this morning, so it'll be interesting to hear the latest on that. How does this work that you're doing impact on trust? Because obviously we've seen a big sort of upset in the market post-FTX in terms of institutional investors maybe holding back a little bit from digital assets. And also, again, regulators being concerned about investor protection. So do you think that, what you're building in terms of the standards and the identifiers is going to help to build that greater trust and help accelerate the sort of involvement of institutional investors in this asset class?
I think so. And when we talk about, speaking about regulators early on, the taxonomy is obviously very important. And, the regulators need to say what is a stable coin and what isn't, and it's different across jurisdiction. But before doing that, you actually need to identify the asset. And this is where, I guess, at the moment, trust comes in. So the tickers that the crypto world are using, they're not standard, they're not unique. You can look at the BTC. That's people think it's Bitcoin, which it usually is, but it doesn't have to be. There's multiple assets that have the same short code. Same for USDP, and all the other assets will have that. So I think at the moment there's a bit of, I guess, you have to trust the exchange that you're buying the right token because there's no underlying data there. But what the standard like DTI and ISIN allows you to do is that you both counterparties are talking about the same token when they're doing a transaction.
And do you see sort of geographical kind of developments in terms of, obviously you're working globally with, I think, 120 different agencies, you said, and obviously it's a global market, but different regulators are moving sort of at different speeds. I mean, obviously the US at the moment is taking quite a hardline approach to digital assets. Europe's sort of defined MiCA, and the UK's sort of got a more clear framework. So how does that kind of global presence impact on what you do? Are there sort of certain jurisdictions that you think are more pressing for this type of work?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So in the U.S., it is very much a heavily politicized regulatory debate. I think in Europe more broadly, there's been a more pragmatic approach, saying, okay, this thing here exists. What are we going to put in place? And a lot of first mover activity on the regulatory side. And then I think you've got a number of other jurisdictions jockeying to become this kind of digital asset, virtual asset, crypto hub, whether that's the Emirates. I was just in Singapore a few weeks ago at an event, and a lot of progress being made in Asia Pac. So you may be aware there's a kind of a digital exchange that exists in Switzerland that has been established that basically caters to the full life cycle of a digital asset. And a new one has just received a license 2 weeks ago from the Monetary Authority of Singapore to do the same type of business then in Asia, which I think helps really, I think, a lot of the activity that we see, particularly in securities tokenization, happens kind of in isolation. There are these kind of pilot things happening in a sandbox, not a lot of liquidity. It's just kind of, can we do this? And I think these exchanges help create this kind of full ecosystem. The standards then become the language through that ecosystem. And I think that will help propel things forward a lot.
And how much does tokenization of real-world assets sort of complicate your task?
Yeah, so it depends on which real-world assets we're talking about. So obviously, the securities real-world assets, that is something that we have in place. One of the things that we will be looking in our collaboration, our task force, and there is some work being done within the DTI standard to look more specifically at things like NFTs and what the implications and can they be brought into the scope for the DTI standard, and that will help define how we progress this for the ISIN standard as well. But we understand, it's not always just about having an asset identified for the purpose of identifying because it may be investable or not, but because a lot of these things will be used as underlyings for other financial instruments. And that's essentially the approach that we've taken, knowing, Bitcoin ETFs, if you want to measure all of your exposure to these underlyings, and if you've got a fund on crypto, it's important to be able to identify them also at the underlying level and not just at the asset level.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be a super interesting development. Obviously, we've just seen Jacobi launch the first European ETF. I think they're speaking later on this morning as well. And obviously, everyone's waiting to see what the US does with the spot Bitcoin ETF. So I imagine there's going to be a lot more products with, multi-asset ETFs and different types of products. So, yeah, really interesting aspect, I think, to consider that as well. And we need to be prepared for that, I think, before it happens, rather than struggling to catch up, as we sometimes do in digital assets, with some of the infrastructure and standards that come from traditional finance. Denis, what's coming up from your perspective over the next few months? I know you've got lots of things you're working on together. What's the priorities?
We're working on the initiative with Anna, which we're hoping to announce in the next month or so. But then from DTI perspective, we're also continuing to expanding the registry. We're adding DTIs to the FCA sandbox over the next, hopefully, a couple of weeks as well. There's a number of exchanges that are using DTIs, like SDX are using that internally, so working with them to make sure that we can support them. And then into the next year, I guess what I'd like to do is that make DTI to become part of the issuance of the token, so that it's rather than people requesting the DTI, it becomes part of the automated as part of the process of the token issuance. So there's some ideas that we're discussing on how to do that.
Yeah, that's extremely interesting. And obviously, we have to harness the innovation and technology that's there. And actually, that's something we can do in digital assets that you can't necessarily do in traditional finance. So thank you very much, both of you. I think we've run out of time, but there's a lot of education work to be done on this topic. And I think hopefully we gave people a good introduction to all of that. We have got a couple of quick questions on the Slido. I don't know if you have time to answer those, but would we expect to have crypto-specific ISINs anytime soon for spot derivatives? I don't know if you want to answer that.
Thanks.
So yeah, well, we are looking at, as Denis mentioned, in the upcoming weeks here, to be able to issue the first batch of unique ISINs for crypto assets, so those things outside of the security token space that we're already covering for financial instruments, and that can be utilized for derivatives, for our derivative underlyings.
There's also a question there about corporate actions, where it says corporate in inverted commas actions, forks, contract migration, multiple chains, etc. Obviously, blockchain is complex in terms of how these forks and chains and sort of developments can happen. How can we navigate that?
It's a very good question, and standard does address that. And whoever asked the question, please reach out to me, because I think it's gonna take some time to kind of.
We might need a whole white paper on that one, I think.
But I'll be happy to take you through that. It's a very good question.
Great. Well, thanks very much to both of you, Stephan and Denis, for being here today, and thanks to the audience for listening in.
Thank you.
Thank you.